Architects, engineers and craftsmen of Reddit, what wishes of customers you had to refuse because they defy basic rules of physics and or common sense? Property wanted us to evaluate the condition of their boilers and determine the best course of action. What they really wanted was for us to say, yeah, you can fix those up for a few more years. Went out with a boiler inspector who condemned the boilers on the spot. We informed them the boilers were not safe at all to operate and needed replacement immediately. They wanted us to amend our report to say everything was okay. We refused, and they decided to stop contacting us. I got to watch this gem of an email chain over the course of a few days last year. I'm glad it wasn't me. I'm not sure I could have remained as professional as my colleague. Paraphrase to protect the innocent. Contractor: hey, the inspector failed my work because I didn't construct this per your detail. Can you remove that detail from the plan? Thanks. Engineer: that was needed because of the anticipated load the owner will put there after construction. Contractor: but we didn't do it that way, so can you just pull the detail and tell the owner not to put the load there? Great, thanks. Engineer: number. Contractor: why are you being so unreasonable? The inspector won't give us a pass until you remove the detail. We've already finished the construction. At this point, the office manager stepped in. Sounds like you need to get out there and restart construction. Contractor: but that would be really expensive. It would just be easier for us if you change the plans in the contract document so we didn't have to do that. Well, maybe you should have followed engineer's plans in the first place. We're forwarding this email chain to owner. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your new, delayed schedule before work complete. As an inspector, this sounds about right. Do it right the first time, please. I don't like having to reject work, but I'll sure do it. What do you mean you can't cut 60% of the weight out of this design while maintaining the existing 6x factor of safety? And since you're making it lighter, it should be less expensive too. Tell Lamborghini that. Truss, roof, design. We had things like that all the time. It's odd having to tell an architect that the stamped blueprints still need to have weight transferred to the ground at some point. The worst I saw was a do-it-yourselfer that had almost completely removed 2 attic trusses so they could make a bigger stairway and wanted us to tell the inspector it was okay. I once asked an architect if he wouldn't reconsider a couple of details of his railing and egress prints because the fire marshal wasn't going to approve it for occupancy. He said, "You are a stupid welder and I am a degreed professional. Build the fricking parts to print and stop calling me." I was back the next week undoing and then redoing something that should never have been approved. Worked in a woodshop once upon an age ago. A lady comes in and asks for a pine thingy for her yard. Guy she's talking to says no. Pine will rot there, you'll need teak or something a bit more water resistant, especially if you're going to bury a bit of it. She was having none of it. 5 carpenters came over to explain to her how certain woods are better in wet areas. She wanted pine. Well, we had lost pine and CCA pine, but we weren't getting into this as we knew she'd come back in a few months back asking for a free repair or a refund. She didn't get her product from us and I doubt she got anyone else to make it either. When 6 professionals come to you to say the exact same thing, maybe consider their words or at least just Google it. When 6 professionals come to you to say the exact same thing, maybe consider their words or at least just Google it. Honestly, as someone who used to be a retail computer repair guy many moons ago, it still baffles me that people will come to a professional for advice and then explicitly ignore said advice. I work in the packaging industry and I've lost count how many times a client requests something along the lines of, "I want my package to be better. Hopefully I can get some good graphics printed on it and I want it to be cheaper so I can raise my profit." So you want something better than your stapled together film wrap, but at the same time you want it to be cheaper? Sounds like my boss. Not an engineer, but I used to work on a project which allocated funding for budding entrepreneurs with good ideas for projects. I had one guy who was adamant he wouldn't talk to me at all until I signed an NDA, but wanted big money funding. Our general rule was we wouldn't sign anything unless we knew what for, so we managed to get a rough idea of what he wanted funding for. It turns out it was a perpetual motion machine that used magnets to spin a turbine. Exception, it had no way of extracting power from the system. My boss actually used the line on this project, "We obey the laws of thermodynamics." He never got his funding. Rich couple just bought a fancy new place and brought in a fairly well-known interior designer decorator. Dude walks into the living room and the first thing he says is OMG. This place is just perfect for a fireplace. You must get one built right here. Couple agrees because they have more money than sense and will agree with anything as long as they think someone has some level of authority or knowledge. Problem is, the place they bought is an apartment. On the 4th floor, there were 6 floors in total. There is literally no way to put a fireplace into this apartment without making massive structural alterations to the building. And I do mean massive. They couldn't even get a price estimate from any contractor because the work required to figure out the structural alterations was extensive enough to require a price estimate in itself. Your price estimate is going to be so ridiculous that it's going to require a price estimate just to find out. I'm going to have to use that one sometime. Defense contract. The sales engineer sold an optical rocket tracking system for use on a desert coastal test range. And it wasn't until I showed up for testing and started astronomical self-calibration that I realized. In the summer the desert heat drives a standing dust cloud that starts at about 1 kilometer altitude and reaches about 2 kilometers altitude, and flows outward until it precipitated into the sea a few km offshore. We could not see through it. It was impossible. The only time the system was usable was either very late at night or in the winter when the dust cloud went away. The system was useless. The sales dude did the site visit in the winter. From a customer, why did your system fail? You said it would not fail due to a power outage. We did not have a power outage. ME. Correct. You did not have a power failure. Our system failed when it was electrically shorted due to excessive humidity. The server was under 6 feet of water. That would do it. So an older neighborhood is being gentrified and a developer decides to get in on the act. Buys 2 older 1-story storefronts and plans to make them into one building for a restaurant bar. So far, so good. He hires a well-respected architect to design the space and he decides not to remove the wall dividing the 2 old stores, which share a common truss roof, but to remove parts of the wall to create windows and leave the wall portions between the windows as supports. Restaurant opens, and isn't much of a success because that part of town is still sketchy. Restaurant fails and building stays empty for a year or so. New guy buys restaurant and decides he needs more space, so he hires new architect to do something about those windows in the center wall. New architect decides to remove the wall completely and replace it with circular iron columns for that retro steampunk look, and to keep up a little support for that old truss roof. This restaurant fails because the food was horrible. Third guy buys the restaurant and decides that those iron columns are ugly and takes them out on the advice of some builder who said that truss roof is good for that span after building inspector had okayed the new work plan, which indicated no change to the central supports. Builder was one of those guys who hires casual labor in the parking lot of a Home Depot. Sanitary inspector arrives 1 week before opening to check on kitchen, sees that the columns are gone, goes back to his office and calls building inspector, who rushes out to check on things, condemns building as unsafe. Third owner goes bankrupt, and the building was torn down about 6 months later. I watched all this from my office window and got inside reports from the owner of the bar next door. It was the most fun about that particular job. I'm surprised. I'd think in a gentrifying area the land cost would be worth infinitely more than a 1-story retail building. You can't ask for more software features and get the same release date when we're already working overtime to hit the one we have. None of the above, but I did work electrical at Menards, Midwest hardware store, for a while. I'd like to think I made a few contributions and prevented a few people from burning their houses down. Like the geniuses who, having lost power, wanted to hook their generators up to the exterior outlets. I told them they could do that, and they would hear a pop followed by smoking plastic and rubber the second the power came back on. My favorite was the guy who wanted a warming lamp for his shower. He had his can and his bulb all ready to go when I asked what he was working on. As I looked at his supplies, not only was the can not wet rated, but it was rated for only 75 watts. He wanted to put in a 250 watt incandescent bulb. I explained, using small words, that either his insulation, the frame of the floor above, or the can itself would catch fire or melt, and then he would have no shower and quite possibly melted plastic on his head. Sheesh. I worked for a small traditional upholstery company. The owner was an antique dealer interior designer type with no formal qualifications and definitely not a traditional upholsterer. Definitely a chancer. Some of our clients were world famous designers. He promised a design that was impossible. He just couldn't understand that you can't float springs on thin air, but insisted that we make it. It was a very long time ago, so as I recall, the frame had been made but without any ability to put webbing where we needed to, which is what you usually tie the springs. The company ceased trading not long after. As a network engineer, the number of people who don't understand the speed of light is a pretty dang hard limit when it comes to network latency ping times. That is to say, the further you move the client away from a server, the higher the latency has to be. At one point I did a back of the envelope calculation of the speed of light through fiber and the distance between two of our data centers, and came out with 45 milliseconds as the absolute lower limit. If I could run a single uninterrupted strand of fiber across most of the US, I can't do that, of course, so the 60 ms cross country they were complaining about was really the best we could do. Similarly, as we move some data center services into the cloud of Azure or Oars, a lot of service owners seem unaware of how additional latency will slow them down until the move starts happening. Chemist here. My company sells, among other things, windshield washer fluids to brick and mortar stores. One of our products is a 5-gram tablet that one can put in their car's windshield washer reservoir and fill with water, which will produce blue detergent solution for cleaning windshields. One big difference between the liquid and the tablet is the liquid can have varying amounts of methanol, which provides antifreeze capabilities by lowering the freezing point of the water methanol mix. You need roughly 35% by volume methanol to get to the typical freezing point of -20 F. Enter sales and marketing. They ask if we can develop a tablet that can make antifreeze claims. They still want the tablet form and for it to weigh 5 grams. They tell us this would be a game changer because it's expensive to ship water. I tell them it is not possible because the amount of methanol 5 grams of tablet could encapsulate would in no way depress the freezing point of water in any appreciable way. They respond with, but it would be a game changer. Me to myself, if we can alter the laws of physics, I'll look into it. Over 2 years later I still get questions about whether we can do it. In a previous job, I was asked by a customer and my manager to design, from scratch, something that was A. way outside our wheelhouse, B. was beholden to numerous fire safety codes, and C. already available from dozens of vendors. In more recent times I've been told by internal customers that they didn't like the design of a medical device because of the color I chose to render it in SolidWorks. During my co-op doing design engineering, one of the designers, read people who do the aesthetics not the structural work, blasted me during a design review because I had colored a stainless steel panel green and miral 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 green and I was once asked by my project manager to take 2 versions of the same document, about 25,000 words each, and compare them, highlighting the differences. Because he was not IT literate, his intention was naturally for me to do it manually, representing probably several full days of work, at a time when we had other work coming in constantly. When I used them as word comparison tool and printed the document out with all the differences automatically formatted and highlighted, which took about 2 minutes rather than 2 days, he said I was trying to overperform and that I was overthinking it. You should have milked it for a couple days while playing on the internet. Former patent engineer here. Not me, but guy at the desk next to me was asked to write a patent for an inventor who had a perpetual motion device. Everything the guy had made sense, all his math, the deceive, etc. except for the fact that he simply could not comprehend the fact that friction exists and prevents a device from working. In order for an invention to be patentable, it must be novel, non-obvious and useful. By definition, a perpetual motion device is not useful, because it does not exist. No, you can't connect 10 servos and 12 switches and 4 3000 watt UPSs to a single 220 volt 15 amp connection. We need to bring the electrician back and I need work with, and we will most likely need a new breaker panel as well since this is an old building and panel looks full. Well, you can connect them, but if you want them to work, well now, that's an entirely different story. Hey, you know that old unit we've had you guys make for a decade which works perfectly fine? Well, we'd like to have a snazzy, updated version. We want more functionality, more controls, a built-in computer instead of simplistic basic controls, its own Wi-Fi, double the tank capacity, and make everything more compact. The old one did, like, one thing really well, so make this one do 3 different things at least. The old ones cost about $20,000, so we like the new one to cost less. There's been about 4 different meetings of them demanding this. Last I heard there hasn't been any progress on the project. Why do I need to keep these sheer walls for? There hasn't been an earthquake since 1994. I work in the Los Angeles area. True story. Mega rich couple are building a new 25,000 square featuring house. 18 months into the project, their interior designer begins adding very heavy elements to the plans that the structure is not engineered for. Tempers flare. A new structural engineer is hired. At this point the house is ready for sheetrock. Roof is on, etc. New engineer raises doubts. Here we go. That the structure is built per specifications and undergone proper materials testing and inspections. Despite what the records show. Owner's lawyer up. Builder lawyers up. Destructive testing is agreed to determine the integrity of the foundation, which fails 5% of the cores taken. Settlement ensues. Owner has the whole house torn down and has the excavation filled in. Walked away. Architect wanted to use these specific high bays in a classroom setting. These fixtures were rated for 42,000 lumens each, which is essentially like harvesting the power of the dang sun to light a room with a 9 feet ceiling. They were confused when I told them that was a poor idea. You missed a chance to say it wasn't a bright idea. Ha ha ha. I was once asked to proceed forward with a drop ceiling set 4 inches from the finished floor above, because that should be enough for beams and wires and pipes. I was once asked if our firm could do a small commercial kitchen for less than a quarter of what it would cost, all while the guy griped that it was unnecessary, that he should have to build a fire rated wall or hire engineers for his structural work. Full stop. But none of that beats the time I was given a set of schematic drawings by an owner, drawn up by freelancer, to proceed into design development, and somehow neither one noticed that the stairs from one floor to the next were not even in the same location. The freelancer is used to designing video game levels, I guess. Potential. Customer gave us a very enthusiastic pitch for their unoriginal device. The unique selling point being that it would last like 10x longer on batteries than all the existing ones on the market whilst being the same size, price, etc. When we asked how this miracle would be achieved, the answer was that we just buy a better battery, like Apple and Samsung and Tesla, etc. Had never thought of just using a better battery in their products. I would actually buy a new phone if the main selling point was we sacrificed thickness for a better battery. Roughing in electrical in a block building, I made up a piece of pipe to go from a receptacle 18 inches above the floor and turn out of the block wall above the ceiling. The mason told me the pipe was above the roof. Double and triple check the plans. The ceiling was higher than the roof. My father is an electrician and was doing work at a Walmart and ran 5 circuits through one pipe. Walmart said he needed 5 because there was no way he could do 5 circuits in one pipe. After arguing with them for a half hour, he ran 5 pipes. Only one of them has wire in it. I find this hard to believe, only because Walmart would more likely tell him to run no pipes at all. Just free air the wires through the trusses and save a few bucks. Walmarts are built very cheaply. General contractor here. A lot of people are just so delusional about what stuff costs. A lot of people have a budget that is just so inadequate for their project. A lot of times their budgets are kind of just pulled out of thin air, or they are using rule of thumb costs from like the 90s. I am very wary of any owner that hasn't had anything built before or recently. Don't want to have them waste a bunch of your time before the project is scrapped due to costs. Someone asked me to make a wooden handcart with a canopy to use at a market to sell some homemade crap. They looked up prices online and expected me to make it for the same or less than an MDF cutout display piece from China. £150 would barely cover the material costs. I worked on a giant, complicated system for a government agency that pulled polluted groundwater out of the ground. sprayed it into the air, making it into air pollution, but I digress, then pumping the cleaned water back into the ground. They wanted to control the spray system from the state capital city, so an expensive remote system that worked over the phone lines was installed. There is a lot of summertime thunderstorms, so a lightning detector was installed to protect the remote system from lightning strikes by sensing an approaching storm, taking the whole system down in a controlled fashion and disconnecting everything from the phone lines. The thunderstorms also often knocked out the power, so after that a gigantic backup generator was installed, a system almost the size of a railroad boxcar. The generator was immensely expensive but was finally installed completely. During a meeting my business partner said, why is there a generator for the system when the lightning detection system has already taken the whole system down and shut everything off? Dead. Freaking silence. Well, you bring up a good point there. That's something we're going to have to look at. Once we got an order for some stainless steel tubes with overlapping id and OD tolerances, but no called out wall thickness. We sent them an empty box and they sent us a revised print. I want you to make a program that anyone can log into for golfing. It keeps track of their scores and sends them to a database. No, I can't fund a server. Why would you need one? Host it off their laptop and warn them that if they ever close the lid, the site will go offline. Concrete walls and lighting. You should have thought about that before you poured your concrete if you didn't want surface mount. I work HVAC. We get airflow balance requests all the time. Well, upstairs is a couple degrees hotter than downstairs. Yeah, heat freaking rises. Civil engineer here. A colleague once had to do the statics analysis of a huge butt reinforced concrete hammock an architect designed inside a living room of a family house. Of all the material that I would build a hammock out of, concrete doesn't even come to mind. That doesn't sound comfortable at all. I work for a large financial institution and we've had multiple members ask us to update our mobile app to allow them to deposit cash and not just checks. Going over an electrical single line diagram for a project, I noticed the building has a 240 volt single phase electrical service. Through some magic the other end of a line had a 208 volt 3 phase panel. I had to call the engineer to ask where I should find the other wire. Electricity is already magic. If you had looked at a complete plan, that wire ran over a very detailed summoning circle that would take care of that conversion. Hydroelectric turbines in the CA aqueduct. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the aqueduct is pumped uphill, and he wanted to put hydro turbines downstream from there. Works fine as long as you're not the guy paying for the pumps, surely. I feel like I'm that bad customer at the moment. I need to replace a piece of equipment with one with 10% higher capacity under worse feed conditions while still sitting in the same footprint. There is a very narrow band of things that can be altered to make this possible, and it may not be. I want to express to them that I'm not deeply entrenched, and that if they can't do it they can say that openly and we'll change other parameters to find something that works. But so far I've just gotten radio silence out of them, as if they are debating how to respond to my stupidity internally before applying O0. Radio silence from a machine builder integrator usually isn't a good thing. Open a line of communication. Generally, the more communication on projects like this, the more comfortable everyone feels as the project goes on. The amount of main contractors upgrading pumping stations that needed to be told, just doubling the size of the pumps is no good unless you also doubled the power supply was farcical. Try and pull a 120A through a 100A fuse. See what happens. I would send at least one of those emails a month. They always reacted with surprise. Freaking civil engineers. Go dig your hole. Once had a client who was very into renewable energy and wanted all the lights in their car park to be powered with renewables. They however hated solar panels because they are too ugly. They instead wanted a geothermal plant. In an attempt to demonstrate the impossibility of this exercise, I roughly did the calculations for how deep we would need to dig in that part of Australia. We don't have an active volcano on the entire mainland. 12 kilometers deep. A 12 kilometer deep hole and subsequent power station to power the lights for a 100 car parking lot. Needless to say, they didn't get what they wanted. Wanted a geothermal plant. Lmao. I love engineers. Did the calculations just to prove how impossible it was. I had a VP ask me after construction outside our building cut a fiber line if we could just use some electrical tape to fix the fiber line. This is after he removed failover 4 grams and failover internet due to budget concerns. Civil engineers have a saying, the best utility locator in the world is a contractor on a backhoe. Part of my job is doing design and drafting for a millwork company. The amount of times people have wanted a cabinet above their island with 0 walls ceilings touching it baffles me. We literally installed a cabinet on airplane cable hanging over her island because she insisted over and over again. The ceiling was a good 16 featuring above the island. The thing swayed 4 featuring. With a slight breeze, she called back and asked us to remove it. We did. For a fee. Another lady was insistent we use environmentally safe glues for all of our millwork. We only agreed if she waived the warranty because the environmentally safe stuff may be safer for fish if it ever got into the groundwater. But it doesn't freaking work. She got an IKEA kitchen a few years later when it all fell apart. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.